Hi, I'm Kathy Smith, and welcome to On Health, the Art of Aging, where we bring you the latest information on how to live a healthier, more vibrant, more passion-driven life. Okay, so here's a sobering fact. More than 75% of the population in America over the age of 65 has not one, but two degenerative diseases. Now, this means that almost every single family in America is being impacted by chronic illness. Yet today's guest challenges the notion that we just have to accept this as part of the aging process. So, Dr. Camillo Ricordi is a distinguished scientist. He's an author and a pioneer in the field of regenerative medicine. Over his truly remarkable career, he has made countless contributions to the advancement of cellular and organ transplantation, particularly in the area in the treatment of diabetes, really revolutionizing medical practices and offering hope to countless of people around the world. He was born in Italy, which you're going to see when you hear his accent, but his professional career has led him around the United States to different universities and medical centers. He eventually ended up in Florida, where he founded the Diabetes Research Institute at the University of Miami. So now his groundbreaking new book, The Healthspan Code, is where he's shifting his focus. And it really is shifting the focus to dealing with one of the worst pandemics that's upon us, and that's facing an unhealthy lifespan. So you have to understand how long you're going to live is really a dated concept. How long you're going to live well, now that's where we really need to focus. His book explores the fascinating science behind biological aging and factors that contribute to the acceleration. So we're going to zero in on the major aspects that contribute to this decline when your body, and one of the aspects that I've heard from you guys that you really want to focus on is when your body can no longer handle sugar properly and you start down this path of metabolic dysfunction that leads not only to diabetes, but can also impact a lot of other diseases. So the impact of uncontrolled sugar can wreak havoc on your a healthy lifespan. And yet, we're going to talk about today, there's so many proactive steps that you can do to slow down, but not even slow down, to reverse this process. So full disclosure, I've known Camillo for close to 40 years now. We're related by marriage. So it's kind of fun and it's a real honor to introduce him. So Camillo, welcome to the show.
Kathy, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So let's just jump in. We hear the terms diabetes. We hear, type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, metabolic syndrome. But when I was researching for this interview, I read the statistic, which I think is pretty staggering. I read that in 1940, 1 out of every 400 Americans was considered diabetic. By 1970, 1 out of every 50. Today, 1 out of every 9. And for those of us who are over 65, okay, ready for the drum roll? 1 out of 3, and is suffering from some sort of metabolic dysfunction. So just help us understand, why is such a huge portion of our population facing problems with our metabolisms?
Well, it has been an evolution of our diet and lifestyle in part, but in the past, we used to say, well, it is genetics. My grandparents live until 100 years, so I'm fine. But unfortunately, we realize now that only 15 to 20% is genetic. You may have good genes, but what you do, epigenetics, what you do with your life, what you eat, lifestyle, exercise, can affect your ability to end your journey in physical and mental health, and metabolic derailments, or the problem that you are facing with insulin resistance, for example, that is at the base not just for diabetes and metabolic syndrome, but is a precursor of a lot of disease, from kidney disease, liver disease, neurodegenerative disease, accelerated aging in general. And we see insulin resistance as one of the easiest indicators to detect without doing all these very complicated tests on biological aging, looking at hundreds of thousands of markers. But if you if you look at your level of insulin sensitivity, or the opposite, that is insulin resistance, can be a predictor of how fast are you aging, or how you're aging in an unhealthy way, predisposing to accelerated aging and all these chronic degenerative diseases that now affect 90% of Americans beyond age 65. And if you see, it fits exactly with the new health span ranking statistic by country. That is amazing. If you see, like, we used to say, well, our lifespan continued to improve, so what's the problem? We used to live much less than nowadays, but what we are living longer is not necessarily healthy living. And if you see, compared to the top countries for health span and lifespan, like Japan has 85 years of lifespan, but has 75 years of healthy lifespan. And then you look like Italy is in the top 10, is 10th actually, with 72 years of healthy lifespan. But then you go down, you wouldn't guess where United States is in this rank.
Let me guess.
Yes.
Is it, I don't want, I'm sure it's low, but yeah, is it 69 years of healthy lifespan?
Yeah, 66 is exactly like after 65 years, you start having this 90% of the population has a chronic degenerative disease. But with 66 years of healthy lifespan, we are at ranking 69 in the world. So even Qatar is 53, that we don't take it as an example of incredibly healthy diet, but they're doing a lot to improve healthy lifespan. And you see, and then you have even country doing worse than United States, like Arab Emirates is number 70, Saudi Arabia is in the 90s, and so on. But if you see, there is a gradient that could give some indicators of what could be done. So let's say if we want to reach 85 years of healthy lifespan, that is the highest lifespan on earth now in Japan, and arrive healthy. I'm not saying a la David Sinclair, let go 150 years or 220 years. So let's just focus on arriving in health, mental and physical health at 85 or 90 or 100. But then we have a gap, because to reach that level that is now in Japan for lifespan, we have a 19 years gap to cover. So how can we improve healthy lifespan? And every year that you add to healthy lifespan, you save 38 trillion to the global economy. So it's not just a question of preventing suffering, but it's also a question of economic sustainability of the whole healthcare system, because we are already spending 4.2, 4.3 trillion a year in the United States for healthcare, which is 20% of the GDP of United States. In an age range of population above age 65, that is going to double in the next 2 decades. So what are we going to do? Spending 40% or more of the GDP on healthcare, or are we going to start investing in health, to keeping people, preventing them to become patients and entering this chain of profit that is the healthcare system in general, this 4.3 trillion machine that continue to increase. So that is sort of a little anti-paradigmatic profiling, because right now the whole economic is based on people getting sick, seeing a doctor, going to the hospital or intensive care unit with COVID, and then the reimbursement start. But nobody's reimbursing you for keeping people healthy and keeping people, preventing them to become patients. Like, in a way, if you think like in the pyramids, in the pharaoh in the ancient Egypt, the doctor was alive until the pharaoh was healthy. If the pharaoh gets sick or dies, the doctor dies with him, sometimes in the same
I don't know how that would go over, but let's just, I'm curious. So I'm sure it's a combination of who's to blame for the situation we're in right now. And I know that medical community gets blamed. I know that big pharma gets blamed. I know that big food manufacturers, taking personal responsibility for it. But I know it's quite we've been talking about it on the show now, the direction we're going with this healthy lifespan and how to reverse it. But where do you think the blame lies, or is that even the right question?
Well, I think the first question is realizing is a little like global warming or other challenges facing this century. First is realizing we have Houston, we have a problem kind of attitude that you see in the last 3 years, lifespan in United States decreased for the first time in history. We always improve lifespan. I'm not saying healthy lifespan, but lifespan in general has decreased for 3 years in a row. And now some people says that children born now represent the first generation that may live less than the generation of their parents. So it's a red flag and something that put everyone to think. But I think there is not a single, is an ecosystem that we need to tackle. From the sedentary lifestyle, we spend more and more hours in front of computer, television, or iPhones, or smartphones, because now the statistics show that even if you're watching a movie or watching television, now you're checking the iPhone. I don't know how many times per minute, but is the food industry for sure has a role. Is nutrition, is the evolution also of the contaminants in our planet, because you try to do healthy nutrition nowadays. If you can eat, like in Florida, where I live in Miami, they say you cannot eat grouper more than once every 2 weeks, or some fish like tuna and swordfish you cannot even touch if you are pregnant. Or so the level of heavy metals and contaminants in fish or meat, if someone still eats some meat, being careful not to have those highly fat meat products that derive from also nutrition in the animals, because we are not only what we are eating, is also what the animal that we consume or their products are fed with, because it affects also milk, eggs, you name it. So it's a really ecosystem problem we have to take. It start from the family, start from education, but it start also addressing responsibilities of the food industry and the whole ecosystem. Because I remember we do a conference on nutrition and health span here at the university, and then we have the lunch break, and then the lunch break is a disaster. And said, or in a diabetes, say, how can you feed people? The opposite. But the vending machine provide the support, financial support to the institutions. You have all these incentives. And finally, you see that for every dollar that you spend in education for healthy nutrition, you have probably $1,000 or more spent by food industry with advertisement targeting children and the general consumer with not necessarily the healthier products. I remember that there was like something that shocked me, almost make you laugh if it wouldn't be anything to laugh, but there was a famous company that I will not name because I always have to try to prevent lawsuits when I have this kind of talk. But they say the new cookie, 1/3 of the calories, and says, oh wow, great, they're investing in a better, healthier product. And then you turn the package and you see that the serving size went from 3 cookies to 2 cookies. So it's exactly the same cookie, but you have to limit consumption, which is a good strategy anyway. You can try to calorie restriction or reduction is important.
So Camillo, what thoughts or advice do you have on, or even more of an explanation of the obesity epidemic, but as it relates to diabetes? Sort of, I know it was termed at one point diabesity, but this idea that we eat a certain way, perhaps we gain weight, and with that weight gain, that increases our chances for so many chronic diseases. Just kind of explain again the process of what happens when we eat sugar and if it doesn't get burned up.
Yeah, it's practically is a major problem, and is a complicated one, because it's not just sugar, but it's also inflammatory molecules that you may consume with that meal that can trigger like other elements that lead to resistance to the action of insulin. So the first element is how fast your glucose is rising. So how fast we know that if you have simple carbohydrate, sugar, cakes, or donuts, or things that increase very fast your glucose, they induce a peak in insulin secretion that you don't need to have if you have meal carbohydrates that are released more slowly, or sometimes when you mix them with fat. Like that's why some nutrition use spray olive oil on some of the carb product like pasta or others to decrease the overall rapidity of the peak of glucose. So then when you have a peak of insulin, then the problem is that you are hungry very soon after, because then you have a rebound and your glucose tends to decrease more than it should, and then you're hungry again and you eat again, so you tend to overeat. But it starts a whole chain of reaction, because insulin is an anabolic hormone, is a so-called anabolic, means that favor all build-up of things in your body. Maybe good for muscle, but it's good also very good for fat build-up. And then you can develop visceral fat in your abdominal organs. You can develop fatty liver. Fat can be everywhere. In fact, there is now a scientist in Italy that have been interacting, that is studying aging in internal organs, looking at how the pancreas evolve, how the liver evolves, depending on the diet and your lifestyle. And so it is integrating. Like, so if you take a high carb meal because you're running a marathon or doing a women's World Cup game in Australia now, or other very intense sport, is okay. But if you are like now, where you spend more and more time sitting at the computer, at the desk, or sedentary lifestyle, or for young children and adolescents in front of computer or video games, it becomes a deadly combination, because then you have a high glucose meal, a high peak of insulin, sedentary lifestyle that doesn't help you burn, and it becomes a perfect nutritional sedentary lifestyle predisposing to disease progression. So the challenge with insulin resistance that develop progressively through this lifestyle and diet and nutrition is that you don't feel it. It's like silent inflammation. Silent inflammation, if you don't measure your ratio between omega-6 and omega-3, your arachidonic EPA ratio with a finger stick or in any test, when someone does a blood test, you don't know that you have it. And there are hundreds of millions of people walking around in the world with insulin resistance, which is one of the strongest factors for accelerated aging and unhealthy aging. And they don't know about it. So the first thing is becoming aware. Do you or you don't have insulin resistance? And then if you have insulin resistance, you can try to apply strategy like a healthier diet, portion control, more exercise and physical activity.
Since you said it is silent, how would you know if you have insulin resistance?
Yeah, so what
are there certain markers, like, certain things in your body?
When you go to do a blood test or any control, you can do, and now we will have more blood tests based on finger stick and dry blood spot that we are actually studying for a protocol that we're proposing for the Middle East and Qatar right now. I just submitted a proposal yesterday, because you need to do massive screening, because it's such a diffuse problem. Like in some region of the Middle East, for example, they have over 70-80% of people overweight or obese, and you have 60% with insulin resistant, not knowing, most of them. And then you have 20% of diabetes. That is one of the highest incidence possible. So the way to detect it is very simple. You can do a blood test, and you have to make sure to include fasting. Generally, do it fasting early at the beginning of the morning. You have to have a fasting glucose level and a fasting insulin level. And with those two parameters, you can calculate this so-called HOMA insulin resistant index. So there is a formula, very simple. You can do it also. You can Google HOMA, HOMA-IR for insulin resistance, and you find the formula, or your doctor can calculate it. Then you can look at other factors that predispose for insulin resistance, that can also be done by finger stick, like arachidonic acid over EPA ratio, that is the ratio between omega-6 pro-inflammatory and omega-3 that are more healthy. You can look at your vitamin D3 levels, 25 OH vitamin D levels, because if you have low vitamin D and low omega-3 and high omega-6 is a recipe for incoming disaster as far as health span or accelerated aging.
Can I ask you one question about D? So with the D, what do you want your levels of D to be in the test?
I like to see them between 50 and 70 nanogram milliliter, but definitely over 40. You have to be careful not to go above 100 unless you are under medical supervision, because then you can affect kidney metabolism, calcium metabolism, and so on. But it's very difficult to go above 100. Like
and what about the ratio? What about the ratio of 3 to 6 or
2 3? The ratio arachidonic acid EPA, that is a surrogate marker for 6 to 3 ratio, should be between 1.5 and 3. And the average American have like 16, 15, 16. Also in Europe now is increasing a lot.
And that's because eating too many vegetable oils, too many.
Yeah, it's like major culprits are like red meat, some red meat, for example, because we had discussion in Italy all the time, like the Angus that you typically find in United States may have 25% fat. In the Chianina or the Piemontese meat in Italy may have 1%.
Oh my gosh, what a difference. Yes.
Or like in Colorado, if you have your grass-fed cows that are more active and walk around, then they may have a better profile. But anyway, meat should be reduced dramatically as consumption, because also the impact on environment, the 15,000 liters of water consumed for every kilogram and so on. But if you are a meat lover, you can be careful to select what those cows, what those animals are fed with, and what is the profile of their fat composition. So but it is a concern, because if you see, like if you look at the centennial, like the Okinawa people in Japan, or the Greek in the 60s, they had omega-6 to omega-3 ratio around 3 or 3 to 4. That is pretty good. But then you take an Okinawa Japanese person and you bring it to Seattle or to United States, then the omega-6 to omega-3, this ratio goes up to the level of the Americans, to 16 or so, and they lose the protection to cardiovascular events. So now, instead of having 1/4 of the cardiovascular disease compared to American, they have exactly the same problem of cardiovascular. So it's not genetic. It's like life is what you eat, what you do.
Well, it seems like you've taken a big step from the science lab into now, the grocery store aisles, and just helping people understand, as you said, that genetics is the underpinning, but it's really lifestyle that and the epigenetics of what will really determine if or when you get chronic diseases. And it's such an important message, because again, getting back to sugar and processed foods, and I say sugar, but what I mean with that is all the processed foods that we have. What I found is that people get out and when I tell people all the time, if you get out even 15 minutes and go for after you've eaten maybe a highly processed or high carbohydrate diet, and go for a walk, get a little exercise, get a little movement, start to use those calories, that it can really help balance those blood sugar levels. So it's those little hacks, it's those little things that you can do. Or to your point, which I love and I do for myself, if you're having pasta, make sure you have some olive oil on it. Or if you're having
and portion control and
sugary treats. Yeah, exactly. When it's time for the cake or whatever, you still have to get out and live life. But when you're having portion control and what you're combining with, and also knowing, what your weak points are, weak spots. If you can't control eating
Tell me about it. Yes.
So you've had a little, so you look amazing, by the way, Camille. So you've lost a bit of weight and from since the time
Yes.
that I've known you. And you really turned your life around. You were kind of going down this path of
Yeah, no, I'm a classic example of moving from Italy to United States. Well, I was born in New York, but I grew up since I was 3 months in Milan, Italy. So that, as you can tell, probably from my lack of New York accent. But then when I moved back to St. Louis in 85, is like a progressive like body weight increase. And then I had to realize that this stress, anxiety, being in a top transplant program, then in Pittsburgh with Thomas Starzel doing 1,000 transplant a year and sleeping when you can, and cafeteria always open, chocolate chip cookies always there with your coffee breaks or your meetings. And then suddenly you start looking at calories and you find out, oh my God, you can eat 2,000 calories in chocolate chip cookies without even blinking your eyes. Just
without even taking a breath.
yes. And then you can start but the realization has come also during the pandemic is when I wrote this book, The Healthspan Code, was a big time of rethinking because, and I owe it also a lot to my wife that said, but you keep going to the intensive care unit, treating people intubated with COVID and the most severe cases of COVID with the stem cell treatment that incidentally were great. We save 100% of the people treated, while more than 50% died in the control group. Then you do the cell transplant of insulin-producing cells in the most severe cases of diabetes. But what are you doing to prevent these people from becoming severe, entering the ICU, or having severe hypoglycemia because of diabetes type 1 not compensated? And that's when we started looking more at these factors that are in common to disease recurrence after a successful treatment. Because right now you get a transplant, say, okay, have your transplant insulin producing cells, you're cured, go back home. And then you start doing exactly the same thing that brought you to insulin resistance. And then the transplant fails. So you start using insulin again after 1, 3, 5 years. And there is a study now that came out that 20 years after successful islet transplantation, only 8% of the patients are still not requiring insulin, and 50% of the transplant are still working, which is great. You can increase lifespan, you can improve life for many people, but let's address, instead of hiding the negative results, and let's address why there are so many failure of treatment over time after a successful cure. And what are the factors that are in common to the epidemic of autoimmune diseases affecting 20% of the population with 100 different pathologies that has been increasing constantly? The epidemic of chronic diseases, age-related, after you pass age 65, the epidemic of COVID and complication of COVID. If you look, they all have similar risk factor and baseline, because if your immune system is unable to modulate inflammation and immunity, if you have an enterovirus or a Coxsackie virus, you may develop diabetes type 1 attacking the pancreas. If you have SARS-CoV-2, you may have the cytokine storm and have a severe COVID. And it's so simple in a way to try to affect some of these baseline risk factors, because vitamin D and omega-3 are very simple to take, and it would be difficult to take sufficient amount from fish, especially if you cannot, like to get 5 grams omega-3, you would have to eat 6 kilograms of lobster or 2 kilograms of tuna, and then you have to worry about the heavy metals, because the problem with heavy metals is that you don't, unlike glucose and donuts, that if you run, you take care of it. If you have highly processed food, and heavy metals, you accumulate the heavy metals. You don't, unless you go to do detox, chelating therapy that may help.
So it sounds like you're just sounding, the bugle and saying it's time for a wake up.
Yeah.
That, we're consuming too many empty calories. We're consuming too many, processed foods. We're not moving our bodies enough. We're consuming foods that cause inflammation. And there are some simple strategies, simple places to start And it's all in your book. So that's what I love about what you've done. I know I've kept you here a little longer than I said I would. So before I let you go, is there any one last takeaway that you want to give us before you say goodbye? I know you're heading, I know you're heading to Europe and
Yeah,
you're going to be
in
in
the next,
Italy.
I think it is important to become aware that we can blame everyone. We can blame the food industry, the pollution, the waters with heavy metals, the fish contaminated, the fat in the cows or the meat consumption, alcohol. But it starts all from us and from becoming aware at least of what are the risk factors and how we can try to avoid them or minimize them. Being also aware that every time you go in a supermarket, I say it's like being in a barricades war. You have to try to detect, find out, read the labels, and find out was this fed with hormones and antibiotics and this, and what is the glycemic index. And then now I also propose to start looking, Google that food product, how many omega-6 versus omega-3 has, because, vegetable oils, refined vegetable oils, tons of people, including in my family, started using refined vegetable oils because, they're cheaper if you have to use a lot. It's like, and food industry is using. You go to restaurant chains that maybe have Italian names, but you get the salad and then you have dressing with refined vegetable oils that may have over 70% omega-6 pro-inflammatory. So the first suggestion, like if you use extra virgin olive oil, or at least olive oil, and you don't put a lot, because then you get into the problem, the other complexities, calorie control, portion control, so that, if 1 spoon of oil is 100 calories, you have to be careful because 3 spoons is more than a dish of pasta. So that's, we use the spray, the little nebulizer
Yeah, that's
for
smart.
extra virgin olive oil many times, not always, except in pesto that I still put olive oil added to the basil and pine nuts. But I love cooking, so for me it's been an interesting
Journey. Yeah, I can imagine.
journey to try to cook healthy and teach my children, grandchildren, and everyone around. But it's
Well,
complicated,
Camillo,
but it's
you're
feasible.
amazing.
Start from us. We can blame everyone, the environment, the nutrition, the restaurants, but we can be in charge of our health span or try to limit the negative effect of the environment and the ultra processed refined foods that tempt us constantly.
Well, listen, I really appreciate all the information, and our audience, the listeners are going to love all of this, and I appreciate you being on the show. And I can't wait till next time I'm in Miami, maybe for Art Basel. You're not going to be there probably, but at one point we'll have to sit down and you'll have to do some cooking, and we'll continue the discussion.
Yeah, and we can see all the 3 grandchildren growing up and the whole family. We'll have a very nice kitchen party where everybody cooks their favorite meal.
Oh, I love it.
Looking forward.
Thank you so much, Camillo. It's been a pleasure.
It's great. Thank you for having me.
It was such a pleasure having Dr. Ricordi on the podcast today. And his big takeaway, as he said, it's time to wake up. We're consuming too many empty calories and way too much sugar, and our bodies just were not designed to handle the overabundance of processed foods and sugary carbohydrates. And guess what? Now we're paying the price. But there's also some simple steps you can do to change the trajectory and have a longer, healthier lifespan. And you can start by just really minimizing processed foods, sugary foods, and also excessive amounts of omega-6s. And just this idea of having more olive oils, more avocado, less saturated fats, less meat, less processed vegetable oils. So think whole foods, plant-based, fresh foods with a lot of fiber, and good healthy protein and good healthy fats. The other thing you can start doing is substituting and cutting back on sugary treats and really substituting treats that are a little bit, again, better for your body. So if not as much sugar in them, I'm doing a lot of baking now and spending, more time finding ways to flavor foods without excessive amounts of sugar. Right now, if I eat too much sugar, it just gives me brain fog and I feel so tired afterwards. So part of it's about portion control. Don't have to eat if you are going to go for the birthday cake or the homemade cookies. Don't have to eat quite as many. And lastly, you can get up and this is a real important one. Just get up and walk for 15 minutes after a big hard carbohydrate meal. It makes a big difference in processing the sugar and eliminating the blood sugar spikes. Don't forget to pick up Dr. Ricordi's new book. It's called The Health Span Code, which is all about how to reverse your biological age. And you can find it on Amazon. Okay, quick reminder. These podcasts are great to listen to while you're walking. So get out, put on a podcast. I call it walk and talk. You walk and I talk. You can burn calories and listen to something, learn something, and just, tell a friend also. Tell a friend what you're learning. Tell a friend maybe about the podcast. I'm really having a good time with my girlfriend sharing this information and having discussions afterwards about what you've learned and learning simple ways that other people are cooking differently, are incorporating some of these strategies into their lifestyles. Now, if you're interested, there's a whole host of episodes in our archives and everything from some of the ones that people love, Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, episode 96, and it's all about your gut microbiome. Or you can discover a step-by-step approach to help you through the different phases of menopause with Dr. Felice Gersh, and the phases being pre and post. Pre, during, and post. I guess that would be 3 phases. Or you can learn how to become more metabolically flexible. And that's really learning how to burn carbohydrates as well as burning fat. And that is my good friend Mark Sisson talks about that on episode 94. Now, if you subscribe to podcasts on Spotify and Apple, you can also leave reviews there. And I love to see the reviews. I love to hear what you have to say. I love to also hear if you have any topics you want to hear me discuss or anybody want me to interview. So leave a review, and I promise you, I read all the comments and love hearing your feedback. Okay, until next time, it's always a pleasure. I love learning new things. More importantly than learning them, I love sharing them. So here's to your health. Love you.